He had two documents in front of him that morning. On the left, her pregnancy ultrasound, their child, 7 months along, perfectly healthy. On the right, the legal papers that would strip his pregnant wife of everything she owned. Cassian Rourke signed them both. Not in a moment of weakness. Not by mistake. He signed deliberately, methodically, his hand steady as stone, while Aurelia stood in the doorway watching, her hand protective over her swollen belly. He signed them to please the elegant woman who wasn't his wife. He signed them to prove his devotion to his mistress. He signed them to erase the inconvenience of his marriage. He thought that signature would be the end of her. That she would dissolve into tears and desperation. That she would disappear into poverty and shame while he built his new life. But what Aurelia Wynnford did next, what she engineered in the silent, agonizing weeks that followed, didn't just destroy Cassian's life. It obliterated his empire, shattered his reputation beyond repair, triggered a federal investigation that would send him to prison, and left him with nothing but the echo of his own arrogance. And the most devastating part? He never suspected a thing until it was far, far too late. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. New York, Dubai, South Africa, maybe Sydney, Nigeria, or Toronto. We want to know. 2 years ago, Aurelia Wynnford was 29 years old, living in a converted Tribeca loft that doubled as her private art gallery. She was brilliant, composed, and fiercely independent, a rising art curator who'd built her reputation authenticating works for Manhattan's wealthiest collectors. She came from old money, the kind that whispered rather than shouted, the kind that opened doors but never demanded attention. Her family's wealth was secured in complex trusts and foundations established generations ago. She wasn't looking for a man to elevate her. She was already elevated. Then she met Cassian Rourke at the Metropolitan Museum's annual Spring Gala, and everything she thought she knew about control began to unravel. Cassian didn't just enter the gala. He commanded it. 6'3", impeccably tailored in a midnight blue Tom Ford tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Diamond cufflinks, not ostentatious, just expensive enough to signal power. He had this presence, this gravitational pull that made everyone in the room subtly reorient themselves when he moved. He was discussing a multi-billion-dollar waterfront development with a circle of investors, his voice confident, his laugh infectious, his entire bearing screaming success. Aurelia's colleague, the gallery director Isabella Chen, gripped her champagne glass. That's Cassian Rourke. The property magnate. They say he's revolutionizing luxury real estate on both coasts. Net worth somewhere north of $500 million. And he's single. Aurelia barely glanced up from the Rothko she was examining. Fascinating. I'm sure he's very proud of himself. Aurelia, darling, men like that don't stay single long. And rumor has it he's looking for someone who understands art, culture, the finer things. Someone who could match him intellectually. Then I wish him the very best in his search. But Cassian Rourke had other plans. He found her 20 minutes later, materializing beside her in front of a controversial Basquiat with such smooth precision it was like he'd been standing there all along. You're Aurelia Wynnford, he said, his voice impossibly smooth, rich with confidence. Isabella told me you'd be the most interesting person here tonight. She wasn't exaggerating. Aurelia turned, meeting his gaze. His eyes were steel gray, sharp, calculating, but warm enough to feel disarming. And you're Cassian Rourke. I hear you buy buildings the way other people buy coffee. He laughed, a genuine, pleased laugh. Only the beautiful ones. I have high standards. He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. For buildings, for art, for everything. They talked for 3 hours. He asked about her work, her philosophy on art curation, her thoughts on how beauty intersected with commerce. He quoted Rilke and Rothko, discussed the evolution of abstract expressionism, made sophisticated observations about the commodification of culture. He listened, truly listened, when she spoke, his attention absolute and unwavering. By the end of the night, Cassian had asked for her number, and Aurelia, despite every instinct telling her to be cautious, had given it to him. The honeymoon ended on a Thursday. They returned from the Maldives to Cassian's penthouse overlooking Central Park, and Aurelia noticed the shift immediately. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just a subtle cooling, like stepping from sunlight into shade. Cassian was on his phone before their luggage cleared the door. "The Riverside deal is falling apart," he said, not looking at her. "I need to handle this." He disappeared into his office and didn't emerge for 6 hours. Aurelia unpacked alone, the silence of the massive apartment pressing against her like water. She told herself this was normal. He was a successful man. Success required sacrifice. She'd known this when she married him. But the pattern continued. Cassian left earlier each morning, returned later each night. When he was home, he was present in body only, his attention fixed on his phone, his laptop, the endless demands of his empire. Dinners became solitary affairs where Aurelia ate across from a man who responded to her questions with distracted monosyllables. "How was your day?" she'd ask. "Fine. I was thinking we could visit that new gallery in Chelsea this weekend." "Maybe. I have calls scheduled." When she suggested they needed time together, he looked at her with something approaching irritation. "Aurelia, I'm building something significant here. I thought you understood that. I thought you were different from other women who need constant attention." The words stung precisely because they were designed to. She found herself apologizing, retreating, wondering if maybe she was being too demanding, too needy, too much like the clingy wives she'd always pitied. Then came the charity luncheon at the plaza. Aurelia wore a cream Chanel suit, trying to feel confident as Cassian worked the room. She was standing alone by the windows when she heard the laugh, crystalline, perfectly modulated, deliberately attention-catching. Vespera Lorne. She was everything Aurelia wasn't. Taller, more dramatic, with platinum hair styled in an elaborate updo and a crimson dress that cost more than most cars. She commanded attention effortlessly, her hand resting on the arm of every man she spoke to, including Cassian's business partner. "That's Vespera," a voice said beside her. An older woman Aurelia recognized from the museum board. "She collects powerful men the way your husband collects properties. Quite successfully, I might add." Aurelia watched Vespera laugh again, watched the men around her lean closer, and felt something cold settle in her chest. When Cassian finally returned to her side, she asked, "Do you know Vespera Lorne?" His expression flickered, just for a moment. "Socially." "Why?" "No reason." But it wasn't no reason. And they both knew it. Aurelia found the receipts by accident. She was looking for their insurance documents in Cassian's home office. He'd asked her to handle something mundane, a rare acknowledgement of her existence, when she opened the wrong drawer. Jewelry receipts from Cartier. $23,000 for a diamond bracelet. She'd never received a diamond bracelet. Hotel charges from the St. Regis, dates when Cassian claimed to be in Boston for business. Restaurant bills from Per Se, always for two, always on nights he'd told her he was working late. And transfers. Wire transfers to an account she didn't recognize. 10,000 here. 15,000 there. Monthly, like clockwork, for the past 18 months. Her hands shook as she photographed everything with her phone. The evidence felt surreal, like she was documenting someone else's life, someone else's betrayal. She found Vespera's name 3 folders later. A lease agreement for a Sutton Place apartment, co-signed by Cassian. Utility bills in his name. A letter from a private jeweler thanking Mr. Rourke for his continued patronage on behalf of Miss Lorne. Aurelia sat on the floor of his office, the documents scattered around her like debris from an explosion, and felt something fundamental crack inside her chest. 18 months. He'd been with Vesper for 18 months. Their entire marriage had been a lie. She was still sitting there when nausea hit her. Sudden, overwhelming, undeniable. She barely made it to the bathroom before she was sick, her body rejecting everything, the truth, the betrayal, the careful life she'd built on a foundation of sand. Later, in the sterile quiet of her doctor's office, the physician smiled. "Congratulations, Mrs. Rourke. You're about 8 weeks pregnant. Everything looks perfectly healthy." Aurelia stared at the ultrasound image, a tiny cluster of cells that was somehow a person, somehow hers, somehow Cassian's. She should have felt joy. She should have felt something other than this hollow, terrified certainty that she was now trapped. That night, she confronted him. Cassian was in the living room, reviewing contracts, when she placed the receipts on the coffee table in front of him. 18 months, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "You've been with her for 18 months. He didn't deny it. Didn't apologize. He just looked at her with those cold gray eyes and said, "What do you want me to say, Aurelia? That I made a mistake? I didn't. Vespera understands what I need. You never did. I'm pregnant." His face went blank. Completely, terrifyingly blank. "How unfortunate," he said finally. "For both of us." Aurelia gave him 3 days. 3 days to process, to think, to choose. On the 4th morning, she found him in his office and closed the door behind her. "I need you to make a decision," she said, standing across from his desk. "End it with Vespera. Commit to our marriage, to our child. Or I'm leaving." Cassian leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was a contract requiring negotiation. "You're not leaving. Try me. Where would you go, Aurelia? Back to your mother? To that Tribeca loft you couldn't afford to keep? You gave up your career to be my wife. You have no income. No prospects. You're 7 weeks pregnant. You think you have leverage here?" The cruelty was clinical, precise. Every word calculated to wound. "I have my trust fund. My family's foundation. I don't need your money." Something flickered in his eyes then. Something that made her skin prickle with warning. "Actually," he said, reaching for a folder on his desk, "about that. Do you remember signing the financial consolidation papers last year? When we were setting up our joint accounts?" She remembered. He'd presented them casually one evening, explained it was standard practice for married couples of their wealth level, said his attorneys had reviewed everything. She'd signed without reading carefully, trusting him, trusting the man she thought she'd married. "Those papers gave me power of attorney over certain financial decisions. Including the management of your trust assets." He slid the folder across the desk. "I've been making adjustments." Aurelia opened it with shaking hands. "Transfer authorizations. Investment restructures." Her grandmother's trust, the foundation of her independence, had been systematically redirected into vehicles Cassian controlled. Accounts she couldn't access without his approval. Holdings buried in shell companies she'd never heard of. "This isn't legal," she whispered. "It's perfectly legal. You signed the papers yourself. My attorneys are very thorough. You planned this. From the beginning. I protected my interests. That's what successful people do, Aurelia. You should have learned that by now. She looked at the man across the desk, the man she'd married, the father of her child, and realized she was looking at a stranger. Worse than a stranger. A predator who'd identified her wealth and isolated her systematically, removing every avenue of escape before showing his true face. So that's it? Her voice was hollow. You strip me of everything to keep your mistress comfortable. Cassian smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. I'm giving you a choice. Accept the situation gracefully, or fight me and lose everything, including custody of that child. Aurelia spent the first 24 hours in silence. She didn't cry. Didn't scream. Didn't call her mother or Isabella or anyone who might offer sympathy she couldn't afford to accept. She sat in the guest bedroom, she'd moved her things there without asking permission, and stared at the wall, her hand resting on her stomach where a life was growing, oblivious to the war being waged around it. On the second day, something shifted. The shock burned away, leaving something harder beneath. Colder. More focused. She thought about her grandmother, Aurelia Wynnford, who'd built the family foundation during the Depression when men told her women couldn't understand finance. Eleanor had smiled, nodded, and systematically outmaneuvered every single one of them. She died when Aurelia was 15, but her final words had stayed lodged in Aurelia's memory like a splinter. Never let them see you planning, darling. Men like certainty. Give them the performance they expect while you dismantle them from the inside. Aurelia pulled out her laptop and began searching. It took 3 hours to find what she was looking for, buried in the original trust documents her grandmother had established. A clause, written in careful legal language, that Eleanor had insisted upon over the objections of every attorney in the room. The malfeasance provision. If any spouse or partner demonstrated financial impropriety, infidelity, or actions detrimental to the beneficiary's well-being, the beneficiary retained unilateral authority to revoke all granted powers of attorney and reclaim full control of trust assets. Her grandmother had seen this coming. 40 years ago, she'd seen men exactly like Cassian and built a trapdoor. Aurelia picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd kept in her contacts but never expected to use. Marcus Tremaine answered on the second ring. Aurelia Wynnford, he said, warmth in his voice. It's been years. How are you? Marcus had been her grandmother's attorney, then her family's, before retiring to consulting work for clients he chose carefully. He was 73 now, sharp as ever, and he owed Aurelia Wynnford more favors than Aurelia could count. I need help, Marcus. The kind my grandmother would have asked for. The warmth in his voice shifted to something steelier. Tell me everything. She did. The affair, the financial manipulation, the pregnancy, Cassian's threats. Marcus listened without interruption, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Your grandmother wrote that malfeasance clause for exactly this scenario, he said finally. She told me once that brilliant men make predictable monsters. We're going to activate it, Aurelia. But we're going to be patient. Methodical. And when we move, we're going to make sure Cassian Rourke never sees it coming. Aurelia became invisible. That was the strategy Marcus had outlined during their second meeting at his Midtown office, away from any possibility of Cassian's surveillance. He needs to believe you've accepted defeat, Marcus had said. Give him exactly what he expects. A compliant wife. A woman too overwhelmed by pregnancy and circumstance to fight back. So she did. She stopped confronting Cassian about his late nights. She prepared his coffee in the mornings without complaint. She attended the social functions he required of her, wearing elegant maternity wear and smiling at the right moments. She asked nothing, demanded nothing, became the perfect, passive accessory to his life. Cassian relaxed. She watched it happen in increments, the way his shoulders loosened when he came home, the way he stopped checking his phone quite so obsessively in her presence, the way he began leaving documents on his desk instead of locking them away. Men like Cassian, she realized, needed to believe in their own dominance. Her surrender fed something fundamental in him, something that made him careless. While he slept, she worked. She'd purchased a small portable scanner, the kind marketed to traveling businesspeople, and kept it hidden in her closet. Every document Cassian left accessible, she scanned. Bank statements. Wire transfer confirmations. Email printouts he'd carelessly abandoned. She documented everything with forensic precision, organizing files by date and category, building a digital fortress of evidence. Marcus had connected her with a forensic accountant, a woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in unraveling complex financial fraud. Patricia worked remotely, analyzing the documents Aurelia provided through encrypted channels, tracing the shell companies Cassian had established. "He's clever," Patricia said during one of their secure calls. "But he's also arrogant. Look at this, he's been routing funds through a Cayman holding company to pay for Vespera's apartment, her credit cards, even her car lease. He's using questionable deductions to offset the transfers. This isn't just infidelity, Aurelia. This is tax fraud. Securities violations. If we present this correctly, we're not just talking about divorce court." 3 months into her pregnancy, Aurelia had assembled a dossier that could destroy Cassian's empire. Every affair-related expense. Every questionable transfer. Every shell company established to hide assets. Every manipulation of her trust funds documented with surgical precision. She kept the files on a secure cloud server Marcus controlled, with hard copies in a safety deposit box at a bank Cassian didn't know she'd accessed. At night, she lay in the guest bedroom, her hand on her growing belly, and planned. Not just survival. Victory. Complete, unambiguous, devastating victory. Cassian thought he'd broken her. He had no idea he'd forged her into something far more dangerous than he could imagine. The meeting took place in Marcus Tremaine's private conference room on a Tuesday afternoon while Cassian believed Aurelia was at a prenatal yoga class. Marcus had assembled a team: Patricia Chen, the forensic accountant, Sarah Rothstein, a litigator specializing in high-stakes divorces, and someone Aurelia hadn't expected, Daniel Kovacs, a senior investigator with the Securities and Exchange Commission. "Mrs. Rourke," Kovacs said, shaking her hand with surprising gentleness. "Marcus has shared your documentation. What your husband has done isn't just marital betrayal. It's criminal. They spread the evidence across the conference table like a battle plan. Wire transfers to shell companies. Fraudulent tax deductions. Securities violations. The systematic looting of Aurelia's trust to fund an affair and expand an empire built on financial crimes Cassian had assumed would never be scrutinized. We need the right venue, Sarah said, her fingers steepled. Somewhere public. Somewhere with witnesses who matter. Somewhere he can't simply walk away from. Aurelia had already thought of this. The Preservation Gala. It's in 6 weeks. Every major investor Cassian works with will be there. Museum board members. City officials. The press. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The fundraiser you're co-chairing? The same. Cassian insisted I take the position. He said it would look good for his business interests. She smiled, cold and precise. He has no idea I've been planning to use it. We'll need him confident that night, Kovacs said. Distracted. Not suspicious. Aurelia pulled out her phone and showed them a text exchange from that morning. Cassian had mentioned closing a major development deal, a $100 million waterfront project with international investors. The final signatures were scheduled for the night of the gala. "He'll be celebrating," she said. "Surrounded by everyone whose respect he values. He'll never see it coming." Sarah leaned forward. "When we move, it needs to be absolute. No half measures. We expose the affair, trigger the malfeasance clause, and simultaneously present the financial evidence to the SEC. We destroy him professionally and personally in one stroke." "And Vespera?" Aurelia asked quietly. Patricia smiled, sharp and satisfied. "We've traced several transfers that implicate her in knowing participation in the fraud. She's not innocent here. When Cassian falls, she falls with him." Marcus looked at Aurelia across the table, his expression grave. "Once we do this, there's no going back. Your marriage ends. Publicly. Brutally. Are you certain?" Aurelia placed her hand on her belly, feeling the flutter of movement. Her daughter. Her future. Her reason for everything. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The Metropolitan Museum glittered like a jewel box. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors where Manhattan's elite gathered in evening wear that cost more than most cars. The Preservation Gala had exceeded every expectation, 1,200 guests, a silent auction projected to raise $8 million, and enough social currency concentrated in one room to move markets. Aurelia stood near the entrance in a custom emerald silk gown that accommodated her 7-month pregnancy with elegant grace. She'd spent 2 hours on hair and makeup, transforming herself into the perfect vision of composed sophistication. She looked like a woman who had everything. A woman who had won. Cassian arrived 20 minutes late with Vespera on his arm. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. Vespera wore a backless gold lame dress, her platinum hair swept up to expose a diamond necklace Aurelia recognized from the receipts, $45,000, purchased 3 weeks ago. They moved through the crowd like royalty, Cassian's hand possessive on Vespera's lower back, his laugh carrying across the gallery. Aurelia watched from across the room, her champagne glass, filled with sparkling water, steady in her hand. She felt nothing. No rage, no heartbreak, no humiliation. Just a cold, crystalline focus that made everything sharp and clear. Cassian was holding court near the Rothko installation, surrounded by his investors. She could hear fragments of his conversation, his voice elevated with triumph. "The waterfront deal closes tonight. Largest single development in the city's history. International capital, municipal support, everything aligned perfectly." His business partner raised a glass. "To Cassian Rourke. The man who makes impossible deals possible." They drank. They congratulated. They celebrated a man who believed himself untouchable. Vespera leaned close to Cassian, whispering something that made him smile. His hand moved to her waist, a gesture of ownership, of victory. He'd gotten everything he wanted, the mistress, the money, the empire, the respect. And the pregnant wife he'd financially crippled stood across the room in a beautiful dress, playing her role perfectly. Aurelia checked her phone. A text from Marcus, "Everyone in position. Kovacs is in the North Gallery. Media contacts alerted. We're ready when you are." She typed back, 5 minutes. Then she set down her glass, smoothed her dress over her belly, and walked toward the stage where the evening's program would begin. Her heels clicked against marble with the steady rhythm of a countdown. Cassian never even looked her direction. He was too busy celebrating his victory to notice his wife preparing his execution. Aurelia took the stage as the string quartet finished their set. The microphone felt solid in her hand, grounding. 1,200 faces turned toward her, conversation dimming to expectant silence. She found Cassian in the crowd, still standing with Vespera, his expression mildly curious, slightly annoyed that his wife was interrupting the evening's momentum. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying perfectly through the gallery. "I want to thank you all for supporting the museum's preservation efforts tonight. Your generosity means everything." Polite applause. She waited for it to fade. "I also want to share something personal. Something I've learned over the past 7 months." She paused, her hand moving to her belly. "I've learned that the most elegant facades often hide the ugliest truths." The room shifted. Discomfort rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Behind her, a screen descended from the ceiling. The projection system she'd insisted on for the auction presentations. On it, an image appeared, a wire transfer receipt. Cassian's account to a Cayman holding company. $50,000. Dated 6 months ago. Cassian's face went pale. "My husband," Aurelia continued, her voice steady as surgical steel, "has been conducting an affair with Vespera Lorne for 18 months. He's funded her lifestyle using assets he fraudulently transferred from my family's trust." The screen cycled through images. Bank statements. Shell company documents. Receipts for jewelry, apartments, cars. Each one meticulously labeled, dated, sourced. Vespera tried to move toward the exit. 2 museum security guards, positioned by Marcus, blocked her path. "But it's not just infidelity," Aurelia said. "It's securities fraud. Tax evasion. The systematic looting of protected assets. My husband used my family's wealth to build his empire while betraying every legal and moral obligation he had." Cassian was pushing through the crowd now, his face twisted with rage. "Aurelia, stop this. I've already stopped it." Her voice cut through his. "The Securities and Exchange Commission has been investigating you for 6 weeks. Every document you're seeing has been submitted to federal authorities." Daniel Kovacs stepped forward from the crowd, badge visible. "Cassian Rourke, I'm Special Investigator Kovacs with the SEC. We need you to come with us." The room erupted. Investors backing away. Press cameras flashing. Vespera's face crumbling as she realized she was implicated. Cassian standing frozen, finally understanding that the submissive wife he dismissed had orchestrated his complete destruction. "And one more thing," Aurelia said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I'm activating the malfeasance clause in my family trust. Effective immediately, you have no access to any asset we've shared. Your waterfront deal, built on capital you no longer control. It's over, Cassian. All of it." 3 months later, Aurelia stood in the sunlit office of what had once been Cassian's headquarters. The building overlooked Central Park, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city he'd tried to conquer. The signage outside no longer read Rourke Properties. It read Wynnford Foundation for Arts and Community Development. The divorce had been swift once the criminal charges landed. Cassian's attorneys, realizing their client faced federal prosecution, had advised him to accept whatever terms Aurelia offered. He'd signed everything from a detention center in Lower Manhattan, his empire already dismantled, his investors fled, his reputation destroyed beyond salvaging. Vespera had turned state's evidence in exchange for immunity, providing testimony that buried him deeper. Aurelia had recovered everything. The trust funds. The properties. The assets he'd hidden in shell companies. Marcus and his team had traced every dollar, reclaimed every piece, left Cassian with nothing but legal bills he couldn't pay and a prison sentence he couldn't escape. The foundation had launched quietly 2 weeks ago. Its mission, supporting emerging artists from underserved communities, funding art education, preserving cultural institutions. Everything Cassian had claimed to care about but never actually supported. Aurelia had turned his empire into something meaningful, something that would outlast both of them. Her mother had visited yesterday, standing in this same office, tears in her eyes. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Margaret had said, squeezing Aurelia's hand. "You didn't just survive him. You transformed everything he touched." Now Aurelia sat at her desk, reviewing grant applications, when the first contraction hit. Sharp, unmistakable, perfectly timed. She called her doctor, texted Marcus and Isabella, gathered the hospital bag she'd kept packed for weeks. 12 hours later, in a private room at Lenox Hill Hospital with spring light filtering through the windows, Aurelia held her daughter for the first time. The baby was perfect, dark hair, steel-gray eyes that would probably change, tiny fists gripping Aurelia's finger with surprising strength. "Eleanor," Aurelia whispered, naming her daughter after the grandmother who'd built the foundation that saved them both. "Eleanor Wynnford. You're going to be extraordinary." The baby yawned, completely unconcerned with empires or betrayals or the fact that her father was in prison and her mother had just rebuilt an entire legacy from ruins. Aurelia looked at her daughter and felt something she hadn't felt in over a year. Not just survival. Not just victory. But genuine, unshakable peace. She'd won everything that mattered. And the future, bright and unwritten, belonged entirely to them. I hope you enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in my next story.